The Realtime Rack is a joint venture between Soundcraft and Universal Audio, and it's a DSP plugin engine that runs UAD2 plugins. There are plenty of plugin solutions on the market, and many of our users are already using those with our consoles. However, there was a call for us to have more of an integrated plugin solution for VI series consoles. So when we looked at the market, we decided to start a relationship with Universal Audio, because the ethos behind that company is very similar to the ethos that we have at Soundcraft. With the VI series consoles, when we came to go digital, we looked at the workflow of analog consoles, and we kept all the good stuff about the analog consoles. So we kept the sound quality, and we kept the fact that you can see what's going on all the time on an analog console. So you can see multiple screens on a VI series console, for example. And we kept a lot of control available, but then we added all the benefits of digital consoles as well, so Snapshot Recall and multiple layers and small and light and all of those other good things. Universal Audio model analog vintage equipment and make plugins out of it. That gives the engineers an environment with which they're comfortable to work, because they know and they recognise it, and they know how the units are going to perform. They also don't just model a transfer function, they model the electrical circuit of the original analog equipment. Okay, so it's less of an illustration of a piece of equipment and more an actual example of a piece of hardware. So that ethos really fitted with the way that Soundcraft approaches its VI series consoles. So we're just going to show you through the control software. The control software runs on a Mac. In this case, I've got it running on a Mac Mini, which is rack mounted in the next Sonic case, along with the Realtime Rack below the console. The control software basically is the interface by which you're going to control all of the plugins parameters before taking a snapshot from the console and taking a picture of all of the plugin settings in the box. There's two fundamental ways to use it, either with a touchscreen we've got here or with a Mac laptop. I'm going to show you through the touchscreen first, and then talk about how you might use it on a laptop on tour as a different approach. So the first page here is our inserts page. The Realtime Rack has 16 channels, which are accessible by optical Midi, and up to 8 plugins shown vertically down the channels. Okay, on this screen I get an overview of how many inserts I've got on each channel, and of course how much DSP resource I'm using and how much memory I'm using. On here we can also power on and off different plugins. Just pop those back on. We can remove a plugin. We can move a plugin, and we can copy and paste plugins as well. We also on this screen have an isolate function where we can go in and we can isolate individual channels. What that does is to isolate those channels from Snapshot Recall. Obviously, if you had perhaps a master bus compressor, you wouldn't want that to be controlled via a snapshot, because you may well change or have a negative effect on the whole sound system. We then have a gains page, okay, where we can see the inputs and the outputs, or we can look at just inputs with the meters, just outputs, or again both. We have a little default function here, and if I had a gain that was down, with the default I can just tap it and pop it back to 0 dB. And again we've got access to isolate in here, so once you've made some settings changes you want to isolate them. At the bottom you can see link buttons. Realtime Rack's 16 channels can be linked into 8 stereo pairs, and I do that by pushing the link button, and I can unlink them the same way. Okay, this page is a delay group page. A VI console is essentially a fixed latency product with additional latency added every time you go through a bus, which is pretty common in pro audio. Our view is the best thing we can do with latency is to empower the user to understand and to work with it. So this delay group page allows us to choose a target delay compensation between short, medium and long, and then it allows us to group channels together. And what happens when I group channels together, if I just go up here and turn them off, is at the bottom you can see the number of samples that various channels are taking, and when I put them in a group, let's go all the way across to this one that's taking 0, you'll see that they all now have the same sample delay. The reason that's a good idea is it goes without saying that if you were to mic up a snare drum with a snare top, snare bottom, you'd obviously want the latency to be the same between those two channels all the way through the audio system. But quite frankly, if the guitarist cab has a 3 millisecond delay with reference to the kick drum, it really doesn't make any difference. So what this enables an engineer to do is to control the amount of latency through the system and choose where he needs ultimate control over it and manage it, and then choose where he doesn't need to do that. So then we have the channel strip view. On the left hand side we can see the 8 plugins, and we can go into each individual plugin and we can have a view of the channel strip. When we're on a channel strip, we'd see multiple plugins up and down. When we're on a plugin itself, we see just one plugin. Within that plugin we have a zoom function. Now if you're only going to use a touchscreen, the way to think of the zoom function is its resolution. And what I mean by that is out here, small adjustments are quite difficult to do, and when I've zoomed in here, it's very easy to make very minute changes, which is obviously going to be very important in a live environment. To add a plugin, I simply tap on here, and a list showing all of these different product plugins is going to appear. Okay, and then I can go in and control it. Again, we've got the input gain and the output gain. We've got the plugin view. On the plugin view there's a power button, okay, and then we've got the channel strip view where we now have the zoomed in SPL here, and as I scroll down you can see the solid state bus compressor underneath. For each of the plugins there are presets, and we're just going to pause a little bit to talk about why that's a good idea. The real-time rack comes in 2 standard plugin bundles. It comes in a core bundle and an ultimate bundle. The core bundle has 14 plugins and the ultimate bundle has 74 plugins. We kind of assume that the ultimate bundle is basically going to be bought by rental companies, and when you see the snapshot integration of the VI console, that will become clear why. But the core bundle, that hardware unit with that bundle, is probably going to be bought by engineers who are then going to customize that unit to their needs. And one of the reasons that that's really interesting to tour is that most of you will be recording your sound checks and your shows these days and editing them and making changes based upon that. So what happens with these presets is, other than the fact that there's some very quick cheating presets, you know, I'm doing a drum bass, you know, I've got a guitar, I've got a vocal plate, whatever it is, it also allows you to save, okay, and move those presets about. One of the things that's quite cute is if you connect the real-time rack via its Thunderbolt connection to the Mac, and you open up a digital audio workstation software, Reaper for example, you'll be able to access all of the plugins that are stored inside that real-time rack, even though you're not using the audio. So the idea here is pretty simple, and that is that when you're doing a live gig, you're using the real-time rack with your VI or another console, and when you've finished the gig and recorded the show, you can take that real-time rack away, you can open up the DAW file from the show, you can access the plugins that are inside the real-time rack in your DAW, and you can also access these presets. So when we get to snapshots, why that's important is you can record the show, you can tweak settings of plugins, you can save that preset, and then you can push it right back into the console show file, okay, for the rest of the tour. Snapshots. When we show the console, it's clear that snapshot integration with VI is the quickest and most easy way to use this. But we accept that unfortunately not every day you'll be able to get access to your VI console, and you may need to use this with other equipment. So what we've enabled here is we have a snapshot screen where we can store presets which live in the Mac, okay, of any setting. So we can again take a picture of all the plugin settings in the box, and then we can name them. What's quite cute is that this number here is a MIDI bank change number, and this here is a program change number. And therefore, when I've made those snapshots, I can actually recall them via Midi, which means that you can recall them via most consoles. And what's good about that is it means that if I'm doing a tour where I'm using house consoles, I can take the real-time rack in, connect to them via Midi, and then just fire Midi presets off and recall all the processing elements of my show. And then just quickly we'll show you the setup screen. First screen is the hardware settings. You can pick your sample rate, 48 and up. Okay, clock source, so we can have its own internal clock if you're using it with, for example, an analog console. We can have it word clock, which is BNC connector on the back, or we can have it clock off the Midi stream, which is what we do when we use it with a Soundcraft VI console. As I said, there are 16 channels, but the Midi is 64 channel Midi. So what we allow you to do is to multi-drop up to 4 units, okay? And as I do that, you can see at the top that my 16 channels has turned into 64 channels, okay? And I now have 64 channels of plugins. To get rid of those units, we just delete them. You could see here that the top one is showing in bold and the one below is showing in italics, and that's basically because there's no connected unit here, so that's highlighting that to you by just showing it in italics in the software. So, quick display setting. I can choose where I have my menu, the left, the top, the bottom, and I can choose this bank size. The bank size is more relevant when you're using smaller screens. So if I have it to 4, then when I go back to my insert page, I'm only going to show 4 here, and if I want to access the others, I scroll along the top. So if you're using small screens, or indeed a number of real-time racks at the same time, then you're going to adjust that down. Midi, very simple. It just allows you to put a Midi device in, for example, for the Snapshot Recall or perhaps for tap tempo. Okay, so it'll allow you to select the device, and that's easy. Then we come to the plugin list. This is an ultimate, so most of the plugins in here are in fact authorized. The way that it will work is this screen will show you which plugins are authorized in this unit and which ones are not. Okay, all the plugins come with a demo, so you're able to go on, for example, play with the Oxford EQ. You can see there where the demo's expired, okay, and decide whether you like it before you have to purchase it. And you can see that there's a very wide range here, from Fairchilds to Lexicon 224s, Manley Massive Passives. There's distressors in here. There's transient designers, Neve. Really wide selection of plugins that are all modelled on the analog performance of specific units. The core bundle comes with the 14 titles, and those titles are basically Universal Audio's own Precision series that you can see here, and then any Harman titles. So within there you get a Studio A800 tape saturation, you get DBX 160, Lexicon 224, so any Harman titles from our sister companies. So there are 3 things left to show. The connections between the consoles and the real-time rack, the audio routing via the Midi, and then lastly the little Griffin PowerMate control I've got here. The connection for audio is a Midi stream into the back of the console. Any optical Midi connection's fine in reality on any console. The data between the console and the Apple Mac is Snapshot Recall, and this is set up here in our systems window. That's in a VI1, VI4, VI6, VI2, version 4.8 software and upwards, and on VI3000 version 5. You can see here in the high QNet setup there's a little UA enable, and that turns the data stream on and off. What that does is allow me to recall snapshots which have a picture of the entire real-time rack box. And in the setup screen here you can see now that there's a small UAD symbol associated with each queue, and you can turn off whether or not you're going to recall settings in the plugin box or whether you're not. And when I do that, as you can see on the screen, I'm recalling a picture of the whole box. The high QNet is set up in the system menu, and you can see here that from version 4.8 software in a VI4 or 6 or 1 and version 5 software in a VI3000, there is now a UA enable button in the high QNet menu, and that UA enable button turns on and off control for the real-time rack. When there's a unit connected, in this top right hand corner you get a little green light confirming that there's a UAD box connected. If it drops connection, of course it'll log an error message and that green light will turn red. The audio connection is just to the Midi port of the console. It could be any optical Midi port to pretty much any piece of optical Midi equipment. The way that you would use that is that you would build inserts within your show file to patch those Midis to various channels. And the way that you do that is on any channel, you jump in here and you can see here that you've got the insert button and up comes an insert window. You can set up in the setup pool and you basically give it a title and you set up where its patch is coming from and where its patch is going to. And obviously Midi channels 1 to 16 would be the Midi channels for the real-time rack. We then just choose our insert point and turn our insert on and we're good to go. The last thing to show quickly is the touchscreen is a fantastic interface and a fantastic GUI, but for some people they're going to be a bit nervous about such a modern interface. Equally, the touchscreen, particularly this one, is perhaps not as small and practical on tour as it might be. So one of the things that we've been recommending users do is to buy one of these little guys, which is called a Griffin PowerMate. They now make a Bluetooth one, I believe, which is even cuter for moving around the surface. And what this enables you to do is assign any control to this knob. And the way that you do that is you would select it on there, and then when you spin it, the control turns. In the case of using it with, for example, a MacBook or a MacBook Air, you would literally just hover the mouse pointer over the control and then turn the knob. So particularly in a live environment, you know, to use my example earlier where you do have a bus compressor and you're fiddling with perhaps the output gain, you really don't want to have anything other than utter confidence that what you do is going to be successful. So finally, that's the real-time rack, VR3000 and the real-time rack control software.